Elias adjusted the collar of his uniform as he stepped into the cafe, trying to ignore the faint hum of the gravity stabilizers above and the occasional spark that hissed from a poorly maintained energy panel in the corner. The cafe wasn't much, just a scattering of metal tables and floating chairs that bobbed lazily in the weak artificial gravity, but it had a reputation among off-duty soldiers for one thing: coffee that didn't taste like recycled coolant. He ordered a synth coffee and settled into a corner, pretending to read a flickering holonews display while keeping one eye on the door. He had been here before, of course, but today the usual crowd of bored humans and distracted aliens seemed different. Maybe it was the way the light from the nearby plasma windows reflected off the floor, or maybe it was just him noticing more than usual. Elias wasn't expecting anyone, but then, of course, she appeared. She walked in like she owned the place without needing permission, her silver hair glinting as if it had captured a fragment of the star outside. Her ears were long, tapering elegantly behind her head, moving subtly with each sound, a signal, he would later learn, of amusement or curiosity. She glanced around, eyes that were unnervingly human in shape though with an otherworldly iridescence, and her gaze landed on him. Elias pretended not to notice and immediately failed. He knocked over his cup, sending a stream of warm, bitter liquid onto the edge of the table. The chair wobbled and floated a few centimeters off the ground before settling again. Her laugh was quiet, melodic, and entirely too charming. "Careful," she said, her voice carrying just the hint of an accent that made words feel like they had been rearranged mid-thought. "You're going to start a coffee rebellion." Elias swallowed, trying to focus, but he noticed her smirk and realized he hadn't even caught her name. I'm Elias," he stammered, suddenly aware that he probably sounded like a malfunctioning android. "You're, new here." She raised a brow, tilting her head in that slightly unnatural way her ears twitched with. "New, yes, but not entirely unfamiliar. I've had eyes on this cafe before." She paused, letting him imagine what that meant, then added lightly, though usually for the pastries. "Those floating croissants are a delight if you don't mind gravity experiments in your digestive tract." He laughed, even though his stomach was twisting in nervousness. I've never seen anyone walk in and own the place before." "Ah," she said, leaning casually against the edge of a floating table, "that's because most humans are polite. You, however, are delightfully clumsy. I find it refreshing." Her long fingers brushed a floating pastry gently, and it hovered briefly before she batted it back to the counter. They talked for hours, or maybe it was minutes. Time stretched oddly when she was around. She asked him about his duties on the station, about the peculiarities of human coffee, and even attempted to teach him a minor alien joke involving a zero-gravity cup and a misbehaving robot waiter. Elias tried to follow along, ended up spilling a second coffee, and she laughed again, that melodic sound filling the cafe in a way that made him forget the alarms that occasionally buzzed from the kitchen. She leaned forward suddenly, eyes twinkling. "Do you know the funniest thing about humans, Elias?" "I'm guessing you're about to tell me," he said cautiously. "They take everything seriously, even when floating pastries defy physics. Even when robots misbehave, they think it's all life and death. Meanwhile, we aliens, we prefer the drama of small chaos, much more fun." By now, he was laughing along with her, feeling a strange sense of camaraderie with someone he had just met. It was ridiculous, and he knew it. Aliens, especially ones who looked like humans with extra-long ears, were supposed to be intimidating, commanding, maybe a little terrifying. She was neither. She was unsettlingly playful. "Okay," he said after a pause, "I have to ask. If you're not terrifying, then why does it feel like I should be?" Her laugh rang out again, soft but undeniably powerful. "Because, dear Elias, you don't yet know the half of it. But I promise, if you survive this conversation, I might show you the rest." She stood, a subtle glimmer of authority in the way she straightened her shoulders. "I must leave now, but I will return." He watched her go, the cafe suddenly quieter, the floating chairs bobbing almost mournfully in her absence. He was left holding a coffee cup that had cooled into something vaguely resembling sludge, and yet he felt lighter somehow, as if she had pulled a piece of gravity, or maybe fate, out of his life and twisted it into something new. The next day, when he told his friends about the strange silver-haired alien, no one believed him. One swore she was a hologram, another suggested he'd finally lost it under stress. But Elias knew better. He knew there was more to her than laughter and long ears. He didn't yet understand the full danger, the weight of her title, or the strange, unspoken bond she had hinted at. All he knew was that she had entered his life like a comet, bright and uncontainable, leaving sparks in her wake, and he wasn't sure whether to be terrified or delighted. And somewhere across the galaxy, she smiled to herself, thinking of his expression, thinking of the spilled coffee, and thinking of how easy it had been to make a soldier forget his caution, even if just for a moment. She would return, and when she did, the quiet life of a human soldier would be anything but quiet. The door to Elias' quarters didn't make a sound when it opened, which was unusual because most doors in this sector screeched in protest before giving way. He was halfway through a mediocre protein shake, trying to convince himself that spilling coffee yesterday had been the peak of embarrassment he would endure this week, when he saw her standing in the middle of the room, her silver hair shimmering like it had caught a fragment of a star. She wasn't alone. Behind her floated a small cadre of humanoid figures, all of them perfectly disciplined, their eyes hidden behind visors that glinted like liquid chrome. Elias blinked. "You didn't think I'd let a minor coffee mishap go unanswered, did you?" she said, her tone light but carrying a peculiar authority that made his stomach knot in a way he didn't enjoy. One of the figures behind her floated a few centimeters off the ground and tilted its head in a gesture that might have been polite or might have been a subtle threat. Elias wasn't sure which. Lyra, he finally allowed himself to think the name, stepped closer, ears twitching ever so slightly. "I hope the accommodations are sufficient. You humans are amusingly cramped in your living arrangements. This is like a shoebox with bad lighting." It's standard issue," Elias said, waving vaguely at the room, half expecting her to levitate his bed and inspect it like a museum artifact. "I didn't realize I'd need more space for guests." She laughed and the sound was disarmingly musical. "Guests? Oh no, Elias, this is a diplomatic inspection." She paused dramatically, then added with a smirk. "Of course the diplomat is charmingly human and awkward, that complicates things." He swallowed, uncertain whether to feel proud or offended. "I can assure you I'm well-trained for awkward situations." "You are," she agreed, nodding seriously, though her long ears twitched like they were trying to contain some private joke. "Which is precisely why I picked you." Elias froze, coffee-induced panic momentarily replaced by genuine confusion. "Picked me?" "Yes," she said simply, gesturing toward the floating entourage. "Consider this a friendly evaluation." One of the figures handed her a small tablet. She tapped it lightly, and holographic images of Elias in various postures and exercises shimmered above it, almost like a bizarre slideshow of his life. "You're analyzing me?" he asked, half amused, half nervous. Lyra laughed again, leaning forward so her hair floated around her like a silver halo. "Not just analyzing, appreciating. It's important to know the strengths of those you trust, don't you think, even if they are human?" One of the soldiers behind her tilted its head. Elias noticed a faint digital shimmer in its visor, perhaps an attempt to mimic his expressions, but he wasn't sure if it was a compliment or an attempt at intimidation. "I see," he said cautiously. "And what if I fail this appreciation test?" "Then," Lyra said, tapping the tablet again, "you make a spectacular failure and I will laugh at you until the next cycle. But humans are persistent creatures, so I suspect you will survive." Survive? The word made his pulse quicken, but there was something playful in the way she said it. Something that suggested danger and amusement existed in equal measure. They moved through the small apartment, her entourage silently following, occasionally adjusting floating panels or scanning surfaces, clearly cataloging the human oddities. Elias tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, but it was nearly impossible when one of the soldiers tilted a floating mug in midair, inspected it as if it were an alien artifact, and handed it back with a nod that seemed like approval. "You know," Elias said, trying to regain some control of the conversation, "you could just send a report instead of coming all the way here." Lyra grinned. "And miss out on your expression when I tell you you're utterly fascinating, never." At some point, they ended up in the tiny kitchen and she hovered slightly above the floor, examining a small stack of instant food packs. "Humans really do eat these?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "They're convenient," Elias replied. "Efficient," she scoffed, a sound like wind over thin metal. Convenient, yes. Exciting, not at all. Where is the drama in convenience? She reached for one of the packets, flicked it, and it floated across the room, spinning gently. I think I may have to introduce you to the thrill of proper nourishment, something with unpredictable flavor trajectories and optional microgravity explosions. He laughed despite himself, imagining his stomach performing unplanned acrobatics. I'm not sure my stomach is ready for that. Her eyes sparkled. Your stomach isn't ready, but your mind might be. And you, Elias, have the most important part, curiosity. That is what makes humans tolerable. They sat on the floor, or rather, Elias sat while she floated, the distance between them somehow intimate and absurd at the same time. She talked about the oddities of her world, about interstellar etiquette that made no sense to humans, and about battles where soldiers like him were the difference between chaos and order. She told jokes he barely understood, using words that twisted gravity and logic in equal measure, yet he laughed anyway, feeling the tension melt under her casual amusement. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. The temporal distortions aboard human-occupied stations made time slippery. Eventually, she stood, giving him a small bow that was somehow both formal and teasing. I will be seeing you soon, she said. And next time you will not be allowed to spill coffee. Or you may find yourself in a minor, entirely fictional but highly embarrassing alien duel. Her entourage drifted silently behind her as she departed, leaving Elias blinking at the door, unsure if he should feel relieved or terrified. A small floating tray of pastries remained, abandoned, as if in apology or perhaps as an invitation. Elias looked at the tray, then at his empty quarters and realized something. His life had just become a comedy of errors with an alien queen as the lead, and somehow he was both the audience and the protagonist. He shook his head, muttering to himself, well, at least it's never boring. And somewhere across the galaxy, Lyra laughed softly, thinking of how easy it had been to pull a human soldier into her orbit, both literally and figuratively, and how the next visit would be even more entertaining. Elias adjusted the strap of his uniform one last time, feeling the weight of the ceremonial insignia he had no right to wear, but somehow did anyway. The orbiting hall shimmered with lights that reflected off every polished surface, bouncing between walls and the crowd of alien delegates in a dizzying kaleidoscope. He tried to focus on the mission. After all, this wasn't a social call. But he couldn't stop thinking about Lyra, her silver hair, and the way she had casually torn through his carefully constructed expectations of what an alien queen should be. The chamber filled with whispers as the guests arrived, their voices mingling with the low hum of the station's gravity stabilizers. Every eye seemed to flick toward the platform where Lyra stood, poised and elegant, her long ears twitching slightly as if the slightest disturbance in the room was a private amusement for her. Elias noticed that even the most stoic ambassadors seemed caught off guard by her presence, their expressions sliding between awe and suspicion. He tried not to feel nervous, but the combination of royal authority, interstellar politics, and the faint scent of ozone in the recycled air was intimidating. Lyra's eyes met his across the hall. She smiled, and the corners of her mouth lifted in that perfectly practiced way that still managed to feel spontaneous. Elias returned a stiff nod, half respectful, half panicked. She floated forward, her entourage forming a subtle barrier behind her, their chrome visors glinting in the ambient light. The ceremony began with the usual formalities. Speeches in multiple languages, holographic displays projecting star systems in animated dances, and a carefully orchestrated parade of diplomats who seemed intent on showing off every aspect of their worlds, from gravity-warped pets to self-repairing clothing. When it was Elias' turn to step forward, he realized that the real challenge was not protocol but not looking like he had just been flung into a wormhole of anxiety. Lyra's gaze held him steady, and somewhere beneath her amusement, he sensed a layer of seriousness. He had been through drills, simulated battles, and high-stakes missions, but nothing had prepared him for the strange intimacy of being observed by an alien queen who knew him in ways he didn't fully understand. And then it happened. Lyra laughed, softly at first, a sound that cut through the room like a small, deliberate starquake. Elias froze mid-step. She bowed her head, not fully, not in submission, but in a gesture so precise and unexpected that it froze the crowd. Gasps and whispers rippled outward. Every delegate turned toward the spectacle, their eyes wide as if the universe itself had paused. Elia's mind raced. Was it mockery, respect, a signal to her entourage? He didn't have time to analyze, the moment was complete in its ambiguity. The hall remained silent, every being present caught between disbelief and awe. Then Lyra straightened, her eyes twinkling with the same mischievous light that had first drawn him into the cafe. "Do not look so startled," she said, her voice calm but charged with a subtle authority. "He is remarkable even for a human." Elias realized with a mix of relief and astonishment that her bow had been for him, not the crowd, not the ceremonial observers, but him. And in that moment, he understood the truth he hadn't fully grasped before. This woman, this queen of a distant star system, had seen something in him that others did not, a quality that mattered far more than rank or strength. He straightened, shoulders back, confidence blooming where fear had once held him tight. The ceremony resumed, but the energy had shifted. Delegates who had been suspicious now whispered with curiosity. Soldiers who had been tense now smiled subtly, sensing the quiet but undeniable acknowledgement between queen and soldier. Lyra's humor returned, lightening the room with gentle jokes about gravity misfires in the central chandelier and minor quirks of human dress codes. Elias found himself laughing along, realizing he was no longer a man trying to survive the occasion but a participant, someone whose presence mattered in ways both political and personal. After the ceremony, the crowd thinned, and Lyra guided him to a quieter observation deck. The stars stretched infinitely, tiny points of light in an ocean of darkness, and the station rotated slowly beneath them. "You've changed," she said simply, her long ears twitching in amusement. "You're still awkward, yes, but you carry yourself differently. You've seen that chaos can be managed without losing your sense of humor, that respect doesn't require fear, and that trust is earned in small, strange moments." Elias smiled, the tension finally leaving him. "I've learned from the best," he replied, gesturing toward her, though half jokingly, "and maybe from the pastries that tried to kill me." She laughed again, soft and melodic, leaning slightly closer. "Perhaps. But more importantly, you've learned to see beyond appearances. You've learned that the universe is vast, unpredictable, and sometimes utterly absurd. And yet it can be meaningful." He nodded, realizing she was right. Over the past days, she had forced him to confront fears, to navigate unknown customs, to endure embarrassment, and to embrace the humor hidden in every tense moment. He had survived, yes, but he had also grown. Where once he had approached life with rigid caution, he now recognized the beauty in uncertainty, the thrill in unpredictability, and the bond that could form between two beings from entirely different worlds. Lyra's entourage hovered nearby, silently awaiting instructions, but she gave them none. Instead, she turned fully to Elias, a subtle bow of acknowledgement that mirrored the one in the hall but carried a personal weight this time. "You are ready," she said, "for whatever comes next."